This is side B of this series of videos, and it's somewhat my commentary on some of the commentary that I've been seeing. At the moment, I don't really have that much time to listen to Doctor Who podcasts. I'm listening to Radio Free Skyro's Advent series, but other than that, I haven't really heard any commentary. So what I have seen has pretty much been restricted to social media and largely Twitter. And one of the big conversation points seems to have been, Doctor Who, it's gone all PC and social justice warrior-y. And that has been countered with people going, yeah, but Doctor Who's always been a social justice warrior and left-leaning in its politics. Both groups are, of course, totally wrong, and I will get to that later in the video. But first I want to comment on the commentary on the first two historicals, because I think the third one slightly bucked the trend. But I saw a lot of people commenting after the first two, Rosa and Teams of the Punjab, that these stories didn't feel very Doctor Who-y. And I can see, again, if you have only been with the show more recently in the modern era, you won't have experienced a story like this before. But to me, they felt quite at home in Doctor Who. I feel that I've seen stories like this before, particularly Rosa. It was very much a riff on the old Time Meddler story from the Hartnell days. See, back when Doctor Who started, there was a kind of story which fans have come to know as the pure historical. The idea being that the only sci-fi element in the story was the fact that the Doctor and his companions had arrived there in the TARDIS. So basically, they'd visit a known period of history and have an adventure in it. Now, the format of the show back then, and this doesn't just apply to the historicals, it applies to pretty much all the stories, was that the TARDIS would land somewhere, and then by the end of part one, the TARDIS crew would have been separated from the TARDIS for whatever reason, and spend the rest of the story having an adventure in that location and trying to get back to the TARDIS. Which is very different from a lot of modern stories where there seems to be a point of going, we can choose to leave or we can stay and help. Now, the pure historical quickly established a rule that said that history as we know it couldn't be changed, in spite of the companions' desires to do that on some occasions. And that makes total sense in the real-world context, because the show, particularly back then as well, was trying to be educational. So it had to tell truthful stories, as far as we know the truth about history, truthful stories to educate its audience. In universe, of course, that makes absolutely no sense, because the Doctor would know future history of Earth and also history of other planets. So he should follow those rules, or she should follow those rules in other times and places, but that isn't what happens. And the show did try and address that with The Waters of Mars, where we had essentially a future historical, where the Doctor was aware of what was supposed to happen and changed that and messed things up. But in some ways that actually makes the problem worse by drawing attention to it. And then you've had also the modern fix of fixed points in time, this idea that the Doctor knows what can and can't be changed. But again, that seems a bit weird that pretty much all of those fixed points in time happen in Earth's history. Doesn't really make sense. I would much rather that they just left that alone and we accepted the convention that this is what happens. Now, Rosa and Demons of the Punjab haven't quite been a return to that form of storytelling, because we've had other sci-fi elements in there, but they've been as close as the modern series has come. And I was hoping, particularly when the trailer for The Witchfinders came along, there wasn't really any hint of anything else going on. I was really hoping that maybe that would be the one that finally bit the bullet and did it. And then it gave us the least like that kind of story in the end, the more conventional Doctor Who tale, which I was actually somewhat disappointed in. So I really actually enjoyed Rosa and Demons in the Punjab, because they felt like a return to some kind of previous version of Doctor Who, which I'm not harping upon the past and saying, the past is necessarily better than the present. Generally, those are the stories that I enjoyed more because of when I watched them and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying, it doesn't hurt to dip into a show's past and use some of the tools that were in the toolbox a long time ago and were forgotten largely. And often there's a good reason for those kind of things, but it would just be nice to try it once. Chibnall, next season, can we have a proper pure historical? So let's go back to the PC gone mad, social justice warrior stuff, like I said at the beginning. I really hate the phrase, I don't know what show you were watching, or even in the third person, I don't know what show they were watching. They clearly didn't get it. It's a really horrible form of gatekeeping and suggests that certain fans who've read the particular subtext are somehow better than everybody else who hasn't read that subtext or didn't see a particular thing in a particular story. Now, I'm not saying that Doctor Who doesn't have political subtext. It is there in plenty of stories, and in some cases authors have elaborated on that, about what they were trying to do, if it wasn't clear from the story itself. That is definitely the case. Some of you may have seen an article on Sartorial Geek, I'll put a link in the description, which made a whole host of points from 1963 onwards about Doctor Who being political. It's a really fascinating list. Please go and check it out. And I generally agree with the thrust of the argument that says that Doctor Who has always been political, and a lot of the points it makes are entirely valid. But equally, I think there are definitely some idiosyncrasies in the list based on what the author's own political views are. And he seems to see that this large kind of arc of political thought throughout the show, and refers to missteps. So the idea that anytime Doctor Who does something politically that he doesn't agree with, that's a misstep, rather than a wide variety of political views have been available in the show over the years. The debate has largely failed to take into account the idea that when somebody complains about Doctor Who being too political, or even just political, what they're saying is, it's done something political that I disagree with. And it seems to me that by pointing out all these other places that Doctor Who has been political, it doesn't really help, because they might be on board with all those things, and it's just now that Doctor Who has done something political that they disagree with. And the other argument I've seen put forward is people saying, yes, but Doctor Who used to be a lot more subtle in the way that it put politics into the show. And I don't entirely buy that. Particularly, I don't see a particular shift in the show now than, say, under Moffat and Russell T Davies. They were certainly doing things that would equally annoy the people who are annoyed by the stuff that's in the current iteration of the show. Unless it purely is just down to the fact they've cast Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. It's like, I'm on board with everything else, all these different political things, and just that's the final straw. That could be. If you are that person, do please comment and explain why you're on board with everything else, and then suddenly the reason that you're thinking Doctor Who is political now is because it's done something for the first time that you politically disagree with. As I said, the other bit that I've seen coming back from the people who are like, a bit Doctor Who's always been political, has been to say, the Doctor's always been a social justice warrior, the Doctor's always been fighting for social justice. And I think that overstates the case somewhat if you go back and watch those first couple of years of Hartnell. As I mentioned before, the format of the show was largely TARDIS lands somewhere, TARDIS crew get cut off from TARDIS, and have to then adventure in whatever environment it is and get back to the TARDIS. The Doctor is, to say the least, an unwilling participant in fighting for good in the places he finds himself. He goes to places, he wants to be an observer, he wants to see what's going on, but actually is somewhat reluctant to get involved. In the Daleks, for example, the only reason they get involved is because the Doctor sabotaged the ship and left a bit of it in the Dalek city, and they've got to get it back. If he hadn't done that, they would have been off in that TARDIS, leaving the Thals to fight the Daleks on their own. The only reason he begrudgingly journeys with Marco Polo is because Marco Polo steals his TARDIS key. The only reason he has to get involved in Aztec society is because they've accidentally lost the TARDIS inside an Aztec temple, and he does his best to dissuade Barbara from doing anything that might upset the apple cart. This is not the Doctor who, a few years later, would say that the universe has bred some terrors and we have to stay and fight them. In those early episodes, the Doctor doesn't have a choice about whether he stays. And it's only when he's forced to stay that he gets involved in stuff. And I'm not saying let's return to that version of the character. I'm not. But I'm just saying that the Doctor is a much more complicated character than people like to make out. Yes, the Doctor does fight for justice a lot of the time, but it's not everything the Doctor Who is about. I'd just like to finish this with just a quick word to those who see a lot of subtext in Doctor Who. Some people don't, and often I don't. I just like to enjoy it on that surface level, where it's about time travel and adventures and Daleks and spaceships and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be about the depths that the stories plumb. I mean, I like going there plenty of time, and I'm going to go there in the third video of this series. But for some, it's just about enjoying that surface level, and that's okay. Thanks for watching this second video in this little series. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you haven't seen the other two, there are links to those and a playlist of the whole lot. Please do subscribe. Please comment down below. Let me know what you think about the things I brought up in this episode.